The Sound Off Podcast. The show about podcast and broadcast. Starts now.
Old radio dog here.
When was the radio dog a puppy? And why did it have its first radio job in Red Deer?
Well, actually, that was the first full-time job. I went to Niagara College and worked part-time through college there at CJRN, which is, I don't even know what it is now, a tourist station. I can't keep up because you know how many times now I have to say, I worked at a station that no longer exists, CHML, CKSL, CJBK. Anyway, yeah, and I went out, somebody said, go west, young woman, and I went out and just started sending out my reel-to-reels and got a job in Red Deer, Alberta doing overnights. And I thought I'd hit the life lottery.
What's the level of bravery that it takes to go across a couple time zones and into a town like Red Deer that you may or may not even know?
Well, it's a combination of young hubris and stupidity that, you know, when you're young, you think you own the world. And it's not till you get older that you realize the world kind of owns you. It's the other way around. It's not all about you. I didn't have a shred of fear or a shred of hesitation. I just went. I wanted to work so badly, and I wanted out of school. And I quit after the first year because I got the job, which was good and bad. Good because I got paid to learn, but bad because there were a few fundamentals I didn't know. But yeah, it was a really good experience. I went from Red Deer after about 8 months to Prince George, BC, before coming back to Ontario.
What did you learn in those first two jobs?
What did I learn? Well, I learned the hard way about work-life balance. I didn't take good care of myself. I got sick a lot. You know, I said yes to every shift and everything that came up. I learned a lot about people, not good stuff in some ways, how they'll use you for their own ends. But I learned, because I got to do every shift, I learned a ton about radio and about, you know, I mean, back then, Matt, of course, the earth was still cooling. You know, it was 45s and albums and queuing them up. In fact, when I had to do my own production, my own commercials, I had to cue the record, hit the card at the right time, and do the read well. And sometimes it would take 30, 35 takes. I mean, this is antiquated stuff that I don't even know if anybody else would remember, but it was very hands-on back then, long before anything digital. So yeah, it was a big learning curve.
Okay, so I'm having a few flashbacks as you tell me this. And I'm thinking, cue the record, 2 fingers on the cart.
Yep.
Cart, lift the record will start, and then you have to record your 30-second spot, and it all goes to cart.
Right. And make sure the levels are good because it's music that you're cueing. Then you've got your script, so you've got to do the script well. Like when somebody walks into a booth now and there's a producer and everything else and they just read, I still always have in the back of my mind that this is a breeze compared to everything else. It's a breeze to not having to do it yourself. But that makes me an old fart, and so I don't say it out loud, except to you right now.
Yeah, it's amazing to think of the things that we had to learn in order to be on the radio. We so badly wanted to be on the radio that we would learn just about anything to do it, including, this is your cart, you got to put your ad on here, and when you're done, you got to take it over to that bulk eraser. Can you imagine anybody millennial or Gen Z listening to this? And yeah, exactly.
And,
YouTube.
you know, bulk erasing, I mean, they used to tease us in college and say, oh, just wait till we have that bulk erasing test. And when we first started as newbies, like, what's a bulk erasing test? But you can bulk erase wrong, you know, when you still have wah on it.
So
it was harder than it sounded.
What is the correct way to bulk erase?
Well, I mean, just make sure you get all sides and get it all really well. Some people were kind of lazy and would just do this, and then you'd end up with a filthy cart. So,
yeah, so a bulk eraser, by the way, I think it's a giant magnet, isn't it? And it basically will take all it takes all the audio information off the tape, and yeah, bad cart. on the fault report every day.
Oh yeah, the fault report. See, there's another thing. Like it where you actually found fault with somebody and oh my goodness, they would write angrily like Lisa didn't whatever, and then it would go to all the managers and you'd just die 1,000 deaths. Yeah.
But you spent time in the 80s and you're playing some of the best music ever. Was it country? Was it top 40? What were you playing?
Let me think about this for a second. Well, Lee Greenwood comes to mind because he's a big patriot now, so he calls himself. Lee Greenwood was big. Barbara Mandrell was big then. Willie Nelson and Merle Haggard, all those guys were huge. And I got to meet a fair number of them over the years as well. And, they were just more or less decent people doing, the Rovers. I got to hang out with the Rovers. How exciting is that? That's what
Wasn't
we were
that a party?
doing back then. And a lot of gospel. The station I was at did a lot of gospel. I used to run the gospel show on Sunday mornings, and yeah, there's a lot of that. Christy Lane, and that's all I can think of right now.
What do the call letters CKNX mean? Where was it? And it had TV and radio, right?
Yeah, CKNX. Oh my goodness, what does it mean?
Well, you don't need to spell it out, but where was it located and
CKNX
what was
is
inside
in
the
Wingham.
building?
CKNX is in Wingham. I was actually just up there to visit with my with a couple pals and talk with them. It was TV. It was a CBC affiliate, AM, FM. So you got to do a little bit of everything. I was hired away from London, and I thought, Wingham, why would I go to Wingham? Well, as it turns out, it was a great move. I left there as program director of the FM station. I did a ton. TV, got to do remote television, got to do telethons, everything, you name it. Learn about farm equipment because we did auctions on the AM station. It was a hoot. I consider that my big training ground, and I've still got really good friends that work there now.
So you're more than seasoned. You're a decade into the business, and you find your way into Toronto.
Yep.
To 99.9. Incredible building, incredible people, incredible talent. Who is the programmer who hired you?
Marty Forbes. And almost immediately, Marty left. And he called me into his office and he said, "This has nothing to do with you. I just have a great opportunity to go back home." And then we had Pat Holliday, who I learned a ton from, and J.J. Johnson, who I also learned a ton from after that. So a great bunch of guys. Really, Blair Bartram was there at the time. There were just a ton of Maureen Holloway, a ton of talented, super people there.
Yeah, that's an all-star cast, and the station goes through, I can't remember, it was just CKFM 99.9. I think it became The Mix.
Yes, I was there when the transfer happened, yeah. So I got hired at CKFM, and then it was pretty quickly became The Mix. Dan Williamson was doing afternoons. Lee Marshall was, it was just all the guys who had the big voices and did all the commercials back in the day, and really talented folks. It was an exciting time. A format flip, if you survive and are kept on, is really exciting. It's not so exciting, of course, when they decide that you're not a part of it.
Well, there was also, I think, CFRB's in the building.
Yes.
And so you found your way over onto that side of the building as well, right?
I did, and I was in transition to becoming full-time at CFRB. In fact, this is going to sound terrible, but there's a lot of context, Matt. I quit on my first full-time day at CFRB. I gave my 2 weeks notice and was walked out of the building. The job that I was going to have morphed into traffic reporter by the time I actually got it. And I couldn't see myself doing that. No offense to any traffic reporters, but I'd gone, I felt I had gone in a different direction. I wanted to continue that direction. And so, it was, I just happened to run into people who offered me a job on my vacation. And I came back and gave them a 2 weeks notice. And they said, no, here's the door. Let us walk you to it. We have mended all those fences since then, in the years since, but It wasn't my finest moment, and it wasn't their happiest.
Oh, I like that line. I'm stealing that. I can totally see that, by the way. Like to be a personality and then, come up with all this creative stuff and say, okay, now you're going to do the cars. Yeah.
Well, and
I
it
used,
was it wasn't a discussion. It was you can imagine Gary Slate in his cowboy boots, leaning back on his desk, putting his feet up, and going, "Okay, so we've decided you're going to do traffic from 7 a.m. till whatever p.m. And if you can work in some entertainment reports, we'll squeeze those in as well." And it's like that was absolutely backwards from what it was supposed to be, and I could feel my heart fall, and I didn't know what I was going to do because it was just not. The door had already slammed on the mix. They'd already hired Bob Callahan to replace me, and I remember feeling, oh, what am I going to do now? And I didn't, Brian Linehan was doing entertainment. He and I were going to be a little entertainment team. I was going to go out and do stuff, and they didn't see it that way. And it ended up going in a different direction. Great people took over for me, Karen Parsons and Sheila Walsh, and I went to do mornings at Cool FM in Kitchener, and I got what I deserved. I spent 1 year to the day there.
how long were you in Kitchener?
1 year to the day. It was not a great situation. Um, again, it was the transition from music of your life, beautiful music or whatever, to classic rock was really fun. We were like WKRP, all the old people freaking out on us. We used to get these angry phone calls and people showing up, "Give us back our music," and we understood. But it was an exciting time. Just not a great place for me to land. I left and Angie Hill came in. She's been there ever since, and she is amazing, wonderful, incredible, and was able to navigate her way through some things that I couldn't.
And as somebody who has been in Hamilton at CHML, where you spent the later part of the 90s, and to see those call letters go away, first of all, tell me about your experience inside CHML, and then tell me a little bit about the heritage of it.
I was brought in, I was told, to be part of a new push to modernize or whatever, not get rid of the heritage of CHML, but kind of hip it up a little bit. Not that I was particularly hip, but I was younger than a lot of them. And it didn't happen because it wasn't bought into by the staff. It was the ultimate all white guys club. Um, they didn't want me in the club. The morning show, I did the morning show there for a while. I don't know how specific I want to get about this, but the one guy, I mean, he was just horrific. He would bring in a singing group or whatever and go, "Oh, don't bother with her. That's just the girl." We were supposed to be co-hosts. He did awful, horrible things, demeaning things to me on air and off. And the on-air ones would garner a bunch of phone calls. So then I ended up on the midday talk show doing my own thing, and that was a lot better. But I still, had a lot of, I had a producer to start with who would give me incorrect information, then turn his back to me. And I'm not kidding, Matt. I mean, this is how bad it was. When Peggy Chapman came on, things became a lot better. Peggy Chapman, I could not say enough good things about, and we had a really good role there for a while. But I still had to defer to everybody else. They ended up sort of altering the format and kept one talk show, which was Roy Green. Makes perfect sense. And it became sort of a music-y, talky sort of, I don't know, mishmash of something. And it was
Schmoz.
not my thing anymore. Yeah. And then, when Jeff Story became news director and then ultimately program director, they seemed to really get their ducks in a row. Things seem to really go back. But I have, I don't want to blame other people. It's just that when I came on board, there just wasn't buy-in. And the other women felt that too.
Yeah.
and the other younger women. So it was a good experience and a bad experience. I got my own talk show, which was really cool. My mom and dad were thrilled. It's my dad's favorite radio station. It was a really exciting time for that. And I learned a ton. I mean, there's nothing like having a half hour planned with a guest and them not showing up. Like there's no other way to learn how to ad lib and save your butt. It's just trial by fire. So it was a really good learning experience. I'm sorry that it's gone. I sure am. I mean, it's all that heritage down the toilet, but
Yeah. So speak about that versatility. And you do so much. You blog, you do voice work. So you're working with copy every day, radio, podcast. You can do it all. But that versatility, I really hear it when you do a talk show. But some of the people that I listen to on the radio today, if you gave them a talk show for 2 hours, they couldn't get to the end. I don't hear that anymore.
well,
How'd you acquire all that versatility?
um, when I was working at 680 News in Toronto, which came later, of course, um, I finally came to the realization that I take things awfully seriously. Even doing the talk show, I would get up too early, go in too early, stay too late, work too hard. Um, I never felt like I had it. I always felt like I was on the edge of the knife. Um, I had to make it smaller in my life. I had to make my main job smaller. And so I thought, what else can I do? And I took on other things to do that in a way to calm my anxiety. Um, when I was living in Burlington, for example, I went to the Burlington Post and I said, look, I cannot stand an unanswered question. I would like to do a column called The Public Detective, where people say, this is before, of course, everybody could Google anything. And people send in questions and I will research them. And it gave me something else to do. I always felt I had to have something else. Um, whether it was refinishing furniture or writing a blog. I mean, the only reason my blog has survived and gained some traction is because I never quit. That's the thing. And I find that's the same thing with podcasting, the same thing with anything else. If you stick with it, um, people get disillusioned and quit. I know a lot of people who blogged a half dozen times or for 6 months and then they just go away because it's not what they thought or they don't think they're getting the feedback or whatever. I did it for me. I did it to practice writing because I wanted to write. Some of my early blogs, thank goodness they're lost to the ether, but they were just, bleh. But that's how I learned. And it was the same with ad libbing. It was, having to do it. I remember a woman calling up one time when something happened on the air on CHML. Forget what had happened. Our computers died. Something went wrong, and I had like almost nothing. I wasn't prepared. And she called up Peggy, my producer, and said, why is she saying the same thing over and over again? And I wanted to die. I wanted to curl up and die. But it was a lesson to me. Don't just leave it when you got the spotlight on you with no backup. Don't just one backup, have 9 backups because you never know what's going to happen. That was like it very early on in the talk show. So a lot of it's just trial by fire, and a lot of it's not giving up and I'm not caring what people think. I don't care if someone reads my blog and goes, I don't like that or whatever. It's like, whatever, it's not for you, move on. I just don't care.
Tell me about the experience at CHFI. You are working on probably one of the most successful radio shows in an era where the ratings are ginormous, the personalities are ginormous, and you strike up this great friendship with Aaron Davis.
Well, oops, sorry, I'm kicking my table. I used to watch Aaron's commercials with Dawn, of course. I see them everywhere. When I was at CHML, I think, oh, she's got it made. I mean, knowing what it's like inside a radio station and still thinking everything in her life was perfect. And so I quit CHML. We actually came to an agreement that it was constructive dismissal when they changed my show so radically. And I was on the beach. And Paul Fisher had actually tried to hire me before when I was at the Mix. Long before we talked about me coming to CHFI to host a show. And he found out I was on the beach and called me and asked me to come do morning news. And yeah, I was terrified, so I knew I had to do it. And so I did morning news for about 3.5 years. It seems like a minute and a half, but it was that long. And, Aaron and I got along great. I got along with everybody, but we didn't really have time to commune I mean, my shift went longer than hers. We didn't hang out until I became the co-host on 680 mornings. Then we started, hey, we're both free. Let's go to the gym together. Or there's a gym at Rogers campus, which was great. Or let's go have coffee and, crab about our jobs or whatever. And that's when we really started becoming friends. It was a more equal footing than when I would fill in for her at first. Then they changed things around. And, I was her newscaster. I was the moment when they could talk about what was coming up in the next bit or whatever. I wasn't so much a team member of the show.
And why did your time at Rogers end? Or how did it end?
Rogers, it ended because of me wanting to move to London for love.
Aw.
Yeah. And, I gave him 6 months notice. I wrestled with it, but all my career, I had my priorities, I think, a little bit mixed up. It was work first, personal life second, always. And, I've been divorced twice. Surprised. And I just thought I'm going to do things differently. I'm going to shove some things around. I'm going to just work's got to be second. I really didn't want to leave 680. In fact, for quite a long time, I wrestled back and forth with, going back to Toronto in some respect, mostly because of the horrible pay in London. But I don't regret it for a minute. And, I miss them. I miss working with Paul. I miss the laughter and the camaraderie and the chemistry I had with Paul Cook. We're still in touch, but that's why I left.
It's funny because I think a lot of people who are mainstays are successful in radio, especially if you 80s, 90s, early 2000s. There wasn't a lot paid attention to in personal life. And if you ask anybody, oh, tell me about your personal life, oh, it's inside the radio station.
Oh, yeah. Like my first two husbands and my husband now. I don't like how that sounds. But anyway, they're all on radio, all radio adjacent. It was like nobody understands us. And then you go outside your scope a little bit and you realize nurses are the same and lawyers are the same and everybody else. They all think they've got this special job and nobody understands it unless you're inside it. I mean, it's just life. People understand radio if you explain it to them. It's not that extraordinarily special. Having said that, I sure love it, and I always did and still do.
We learn a lot about codependency inside a radio station. If you have a successful morning show, a codependent morning show can be really, really super successful, but then radio people will take that codependency and shift it into a marriage. And that's why I think there's a little more failed relationships with radio people than in other professions. And I think it's because a lot of radio people don't understand that in a marriage, you need interdependency.
Right. Absolutely. And you need other things to talk about than work. So my husband, Derek, and I did a morning show together for several years, and we didn't say that we were married on the air. He would talk about Lovey, his wife, and I would talk about my husband. But we just felt because there was a third person on the show, there were three of us, that it just wasn't fair. Suddenly he'd become the third wheel. That's not fair. He was a full third, So we made a decision as a radio station to do it that way. And it got really interesting when he got fired and I didn't. But, it was a little too much. We tried not to talk about it, but I'm glad we don't work together that way anymore.
Oh, you could have the airing of grievances right in the middle of the show.
We could.
Let me tell you what Lovey did last night.
Yeah, well, that kind of thing, and he and Blair would commiserate over women or whatever, and I'd have to defend women or Lovey. Yeah, it was fun.
Did that happen?
Yeah, not as, he wouldn't say something that might hurt my feelings or that we hadn't talked about or something. A lot of times we cleared things with each other. We have a pretty good, like whatever. We don't worry too much about stuff like that. But yeah, we protected the relationship first, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is the radio equivalent of Fleetwood Mac rumors, where they're writing songs about one another and making the other one sing it.
Little bit, but Blair was in on the joke, so that made it funny in the room. And we didn't. We made sure the audience was in on the point of it, but they didn't have to know we were married. So, yeah.
And so have you been in London ever since?
Yeah, I was in London. I don't know, 10 years, I guess. And then we did a couple moves around. I live in Port Stanley right now on the shore of Lake Erie. But yeah, I went to London and we've been here ever since. I mean, we're 15 years married this year, so I'd say it worked out.
You also had a chance to work at the London Talk station, and you're going to have a great perspective on this. And that's, we've talked a little bit about CHML going away, and you worked in London Talk, and of course the stations in Toronto. But I want to talk a little bit about those smaller markets. And when you see stations like that struggling, do you have a perspective or an idea or a solution? Should we be holding on to them, or do you think these stations can make money?
I think they can if My FM or somebody like that buys them, because they seem to have a formula that works. They make it hyper local. They don't try and compete with everybody in the world. They reflect the community back to the community. And everyone I know who lives in Strathroy, I mean, this is just country club surveying. It's not empirical evidence or anything, but everyone I know who lives in Strathroy or St. Thomas or any of those places where they have a hyper local My FM or whatever else, the Wallaceburg station, they listen to it because they know that if anything happens in their community, that's where they're going to find out about it. The local newspapers are letting them down in many cases. And I think that's a way to do it. Having worked in Toronto, I used to say this to Toronto people all the time. Don't discount the smaller markets. In some places, it's more important. Radio's more important than it is here. Radio's just a tool here that it's as important as a wrench or anything else. They throw it away when they're done with it. In a smaller place, it could be your weather forecaster, your music, your whatever, everything. It used to pain me, especially at CJBK, when we had literally a zero budget for anything. And we used to have meetings with Toronto about how to do promotions with no money. And we essentially couldn't. It was just starvation. It was really difficult. It was a difficult way to live, especially when they would do their big quarterly earnings and never mention radio. TV's doing this, or whatever's doing this, everything's doing this. Okay, everybody, thanks for all the good work. And we would sit there and go, I know we're making money. We have to be making money. And we were, but radio just didn't matter. So,
what was the company?
Bell.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I sat here and I go, is that Rogers? Is that Bell? Or is that Chorus? And it could be either any of them.
Yeah, I had a good experience at Chorus. I don't know what it's like there now. Rogers, of course, was the best. But then again, I worked for them in Toronto. I don't know what it's like at the other stations. And it's a different world outside of Toronto, right? Bell, working for Bell in London. No, thank you.
Yeah. To do promotion on zero budget, as somebody who had zero budget for 8 years, it was a lot easier when you had a rock station and listeners who could participate and do things with you. I would have no clue about how to do that on a talk radio station on AM. So I feel for you.
Yeah, and it wasn't just promotion. It was a whole bunch of things. So they, how would you put this, retired out the afternoon host and then were told they couldn't replace them. Yeah, there's no budget to replace them. So, it was things like that. They basically starved it to death. It was a station where you bonused your commercials for the FMs.
Yeah.
But your morning show, Ken Eastwood and I took it very seriously and worked our butts off. But that's.
Yeah, I had somebody come to me recently and say, "Oh, they're making no money." Well, I'm playing commercials. So how can you be making no money if I'm playing commercials? Well, we bonus those.
Yes.
Well, then we're part of the buy.
Exactly. Exactly. They just didn't want to distribute the wealth. And whatever. That ship has sailed. The one thing I will not do is have Bell in my house. So.
Oh no, I'm in that camp as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. They talk about the bean counters and whatnot. Well, there's number fudging that goes on all the time.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's not making money. And I said, well, you're running your ads for your phones on it. Therefore, why don't you sell it to me for $1? Oh, no, we're not selling it to you.
Yeah, exactly. We used to go into in the lobby at the Bell station was Rogers TV, and you would see the big Rogers logo. And I asked somebody about it one time, and they said it's because it costs too much to change it to Bell, because the two divisions don't have any cooperation. You actually have to buy from the other. And I thought that was, it's like, okay, the competition's fine in the lobby when somebody's waiting for a meeting watching TV, but whatever. There are a lot of things that didn't make sense to me, but way above my pay scale. So,
yeah. Actually, at that point, I probably would have asked, well, who's in charge? Let's see if we can do some contra. Right? Then
yeah. There were ways to do it, right?
Yeah.
But there just wasn't a will. So
yeah. I had a similar moment. It was 2013, and there was a lot of talk because we could see it coming. And it was Canadian Music Week, and there's a Rogers person and a Bell person on stage talking with somebody from Radio Inc., the editor of Radio Inc. And they're being interviewed, and up comes the discussion. We're going to put an FM chip on the phone so that people can listen to FM radio on the phone. And how do we do this? Can it happen? And I'm sitting here going like, well, two of these companies sell phones, so might have a little bit of sway into making this happen. And no discussion inside the building on that sort of thing. And then the iPhone took off.
Well, that's just it. I mean, this is what the big heads say radio did wrong, is it didn't innovate, it didn't plan ahead, it didn't look ahead. Trying to get some radio stations onto the web even was a big struggle. I remember, because I was there in those days. Now, that's not to say, I'm not one of those people saying radio's dead and all those kinds of things. I'm not. But, it could have done better.
Yeah, largely mismanaged in North America more than anything. I think we're overserved. There's too many radio stations doing the same thing. There's been, where I live in Winnipeg, there's been two flips, we would call it, in format. And I'm like, whatevs.
Yeah.
Because we can get music anywhere. I think you need to put out a product that's going to have a little bit more personality. We already see the data from Fred Jacobs at Jacobs Media with Tech Survey, that shows that people come to radio for personalities.
Yeah.
And that's bad news for the people we were talking about earlier, because that's really going to ruin that bottom line for them, because you need to invest in people in order to attract people to the medium.
Right. And so many times over the years, personality was squelched by programming. There were some programmers like Pat Holliday who was totally about personality. It's all personality. Everything that comes out of your mouth should be personality, and love him for that. And then there were other ones at other stations and stuff who would, no, nobody wants to hear what you have to say. Just do the call letters, tell them what the temperature is, intro the song, and shut up, And I think we're seeing that people, human beings, it's the only thing that's different. Everybody else can play a whatever song.
Yeah.
Pick an artist. Taylor Swift.
Not sure if you're a football fan in the NFL, but we find that most of the quarterbacks who get drafted, when you watch this, it really goes to luck, like who's going to be your coach and what sort of team and what sort of culture are you going into. And I think I'm beginning to see, after 430 some odd episodes of this, is that who you get to work with along the way really defines your success. And you've mentioned I think, an all-star lineup of programmers along the way, like Pat Holliday and Marty Forbes. I know you mentioned your time was short with him, but I got 8 years with him, and I learned so much
Yeah.
about how the business goes. And JJ, and I got to spend time with JJ, even though we were never in the same market. And Gary Slate, you learn culture of a family-owned business, but also being on the mothership.
Yes.
And in two occasions, you were inside the mothership of Rogers, and you were inside the mothership of Standard Radio. And yeah, it's a world of difference.
Yeah, it really is. It's funny. I remember I didn't have a lot of time with Marty, but I remember things that he said. I mean, he just was a wealth of information. I remember him saying to me, I said, just my first time in Toronto, big market. And he went, the only difference is the number of zeros on the budget. It's just radio. And I thought, not only did that make me go, but anyway, it made sense. Yeah, really good guys, all of them, and great women too. I don't think I ever had a female program director, but I've certainly got to know a few. And Sharon Taylor was PD at CFTR when I was PD at CCAN XFM, and I remember thinking we're the two women, even though she's running this massive radio station in the biggest market. I still had to hire and fire and do budgets and all that kind of stuff.
That's great. It's the second time her name has come up in the last 3 episodes. So
Really, eh?
yeah, generally when that happens, it means it might be time to bring her back on to do a catch up.
A lot of influence there. Yeah, she's fantastic.
So you see all these companies doing it badly, and then you have your own company, and Lisa Brandt Creative Services. So you do so much inside this thing. So it all starts with writing. But as time progresses, you get voice work. So tell me about the voice work experience. So I want you to talk about Lisa Brandt, the voiceover talent.
I have always done, of course, as we radio people, done commercials and stuff like that, but I don't consider that voice work really. When it became clear that CJBK wasn't going to be my home forever, I kicked up the jam and I took courses and I got coaching. And because there's a lot of misconception, especially among radio people, that voiceover is doing commercials like we do in radio. And that's just about the last thing anybody wants in voiceover. So like I say, I got coaching, I paid for coaching, I did all that kind of stuff. And fortunately, I have a husband who's doing it full time. And when the time was right, I left CJBK and that was what I decided to do full time. I did supplement it at first with some writing because I do love to write as well. And it's ebbed and flowed. I've done all sorts of things, some of them really out there, some of them, nobody will ever hear. And I had a couple of amazing years. And then it just sort of settled down into a decent living. And I love it. I love the challenge of it. I love that it's different every day. I don't always love the editing, but I'm a good editor, so I do it. So, yeah.
All right, let me jump in with the fast questions. Who's the voice coach?
Oh, I'm trying to think of the woman from Carol Monda in New York City. I also did a session with J. Michael Collins. I did. There's somebody else too that I am forgetting that I worked with. A guy. I'm a big fan of Bill DeWeese. He has a lot of coaching, free stuff on YouTube where he tells it like it is. He and I have corresponded a few times about a bunch of different things. Can't think of the third coach right now.
First microphone you used.
Pardon me?
What was the first microphone you used?
First microphone.
At home for voiceover.
A Yeti. And I know you hate it. A Yeti Blue
Yeah.
and if you ask me what I'm using now, I'm going to go blank because it's a shotgun mic and it's amazing, but much higher end. But the trick with the Yeti Blue is I find that most people get it, they plug it in because it's a USB mic and they just start talking. You have to really spend time with it. And the trick that Aaron Davis pointed out to me is to tip it back a little bit. I got tons of work with that thing and could finally, upgrade to something better.
It is a good microphone if you use it properly. And for
That's it.
voiceover, you'll probably do okay with it.
Yeah. It's just that if you just, eat it like you do some other mics and don't understand its little principles and doodads, it's not going to be good for you. But I really liked it. In fact, I didn't like going to the better mic because it was more almost not muffled, but it wasn't as crisp. But it turns out that's what people want more of. So that's working out well.
You said shotgun mic, so I'm wondering if that's a Sennheiser 416.
It is, as a matter of fact. Thank you. I'm terrible at remembering names of technology. Oh,
But who are you going to talk to about this? Like, who you're going to go around town and say, yeah, hey, you want to check out my Sennheiser 416
yeah. I mean, I
MK?
just don't care. Is it working great? Do I like the sound? Are people hiring me? We're done. I mean, after doing all the research and plugging in, it's like, forget it. I don't care.
Yeah, it's a wonderful, forgiving microphone that started. It's a boom mic for movie sets and television stations, and
It is forgiving.
yeah. And Ernie Anderson wouldn't go into. Ernie Anderson was the voice of the Love Boat on ABC. Saturday on the Love Boat.
Right.
I'm going to take that out and put actual Ernie Anderson into the podcast so people will know. But he wouldn't go into the booth. He just wanted to sit at the table and do it. And so they brought the microphone over and hung it over his head, and he would do the reads. And there's video of that. And that's kind of how that microphone got into voiceover.
Well, that is so cool. I'm going to look that up. I mean, I love the Love Boat. Who didn't?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I'll put the video of that up on our episode page at soundoffpodcast.com.
That's
But
great.
for anybody who's in radio who thinks that they can just jump into voiceover, try to break down why it's probably one of the harder jumps you'll have to do.
Yeah, if I had a nickel for every time somebody said, I want to earn some extra money, what do I do in voiceover? Well, first you get a coach. Um, the stuff that we do, I do so few commercials, so few. It's such a tiny, tiny part of what I do. It's e-learning, it's corporate videos, you basically have to embody the script much more than if you're doing a bunch for radio. They want you to sound like you own it, and it's much more conversational. And I have still an issue this many years later with projecting too much sometimes, and they would really like you to come back almost like this. This is how you deliver, and it's very natural. The pauses, the hesitation sometimes. It's acting. It's not just reading. And the acting part is the more difficult part to get. I still audition for stuff that's a lot younger than I am because I can do that with my voice to a degree, as long as it's not late in the day. And you have to know your voice inside and out. It's much more than just playing with the beat of an record as you're introing it or something like that. You have to really get to know your voice well. And it's so much rejection, a ton of rejection. We live and die on being liked in radio. You have to be liked. And it's not personal, but you're rejected like 98 times out of 100. And you have to love to audition over and over and over and over again with nothing in return. Audition, let it go. Audition, let it go. Audition, let it go. It's not all about an agent either. People think, oh, I've got to go get an agent. And, I'm not on voices.com or voice123, any of those things. I was years ago. An agent certainly helps, but you've got to do a lot of cold marketing, which is something nobody enjoys, but it's part of the gig.
You mentioned you had a really, really good period. When was that great period of voiceover for you?
Oh, it was out of this world, actually. The first 2 years, the first year, I guess I quit in October. My came to an end in October. The first year was okay. The second and third years were boom times for Lisa. And COVID was actually, don't take this out of context, but really good for business. It never slowed down for us. We worked our tails off every day when we were, stuck at home. And we just, every day we talked about gratitude. We were so lucky to be unaffected by it in that way. It was just, we had built some groundwork, laid a foundation, and we're kind of reaping that while we were home. Are you available? Oh, yeah, I'm available. I'm available all day. I can't go anywhere. So
Were you one of the voices of these are tough times?
could be.
I mean, how many pieces of copy did you read in these trying times?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I can't even count that high. Yeah, there were a lot, and we're here for you and you need support and we'll get through this together. A lot of that.
Yeah, and you and I both were ahead of it because we already had home studios.
Yes.
We had the equipment, the setup, and even if you were a professional actor, let's say in Los Angeles or New York, where you would, take the subway to go in to do the recording, all of a sudden you couldn't because you didn't have a home studio. So
Right.
then came the rush of what microphone do I need and why does this Blue Yeti not work for what I want to do and where do I get a 416?
Yeah, I even did stuff on video during the pandemic because so many people couldn't. I mean, just on my phone, but whatever. What else was there to do but work when you're at home like that? So
Tell me about the podcast experience. When did you start your first podcast?
the first one is Gracefully and Frankly. Aaron Davis and I had been talking for some time about wanting to do a podcast together. And it was the morning I was leaving after visiting her out in the East Coast, on the East Coast, Victoria area. And all of a sudden we didn't have a title. And I don't know how well you know Erin, but she's the most clever woman on the planet. And all of a sudden she went, Gracefully and Frankly, like Grace and Frankie from Netflix, which was huge at that time. And I said, that's it. And she had everything arranged. Rob, get the mini. And so we went and shot promos in her mini and we did all this stuff. And I'm watching the clock because she's got to get me to the airport. And we do our best work just before one of us has to fly away. And that's what we did. So we decided that we were going to just be a little cottage industry on our own, see what happened, have some fun. We took turns editing. We found music. We did all that. We did everything ourselves. And then I forget how many weeks into it, she said, please, 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 can I edit it every week, please? She loves editing. She's kind of new to it compared to me, and she loves it. Erin Davis produces our podcast. And she produces the promo. We decide on things together and we choose things together, but she does all the hands-on work. And we were lucky that one of her sponsors of her other podcast, Drift, wanted to come on board with us. And then another one that she had an association with years ago also decided to sponsor. So we've had two sponsors for most of the run, which is just a dream come true and would not happen without Ms. Davis. And we've had chances, opportunities to join other people and become part of a collective and things like that. We just want to stay a small little 2-woman thing, and we're having a blast.
So when you're telling her what tools to use to edit the show, what do you recommend?
Well, I don't really. We decide on music and stuff like that, but she uses Audacity to edit. I'm an Adobe Audition gal, and she's fast and she's good and she doesn't make mistakes. And from the outside looking in, I think Erin Davis loves to edit. She loves it, and when we do the social media together, we do everything's a collective decision, but she's the hands-on person, and she loves it. She just loves it.
What's been your experience as it pertains to radio? So I sort of asked you earlier if you're an announcer or personality on radio, what's it like going to voiceover? But what would be your advice for anybody in radio who's like, okay, I want to start a podcast?
Well, I would say if you're in radio and you want to start a podcast, you're already 80% of the way there because you already know, how to edit, what the software's like, how to use a microphone, all those different things. You're already somebody just coming in from nowhere is way behind. But The thing I think is you need patience and low expectations of it. I do another podcast with a gentleman I co-wrote a book with, and we don't have tons of downloads. We don't have, it's not taking off at this point and all that kind of stuff. But we're both committed to doing it, and making it a package of something. So for radio, find something, go with something you love. Just whatever you do, be authentic about it. There's a niche for everything. There's an audience for absolutely everything, no matter how small. And I think authenticity wins. If you're being yourself and doing something you truly care about. It's funny when we go over topics and, we both have veto power. And she'll bring me something she feels great about, and I'll explain why I don't and veto it, and vice versa. We both have to be on board and interested. Um, and I think that's part of the reason that it works, because we're both authentic about it.
I know Aaron about as well as I know you. And it's been one podcast conversation, which is crazy because, sometimes, I've never worked in Toronto and never really got near it other than I'm just going to pop in for the day and go to the mothership and say hello. And so I kind of feel I missed out on a lot of that Toronto experience. In fact, I work with Maureen Holloway and she brought it to my attention. We've never met. And I've known her for 25, 30 years and we've never met. Isn't that crazy?
She's one of the best, most clever writers I've ever known.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And she's got a Substack with Wendy Mesley, and I'll tell you right now, just sign up right now for that thing. Support it. It's great.
Cool.
I wanted to ask you something very serious.
Okay.
No. One of the things I admire about your podcast that you brought from radio, both you and Aaron, which is why it is so successful, is the consistency at which you release episodes. You're about 95 some odd episodes in on this thing, but every Thursday morning this thing comes out. And so could you just speak to that consistency as you gear towards episode 100?
Well, it's kind of like what I said about blogging. You decide to do it, you say you're going to do it, and then you do it. We get wonderful emails and wonderful messages from listeners, and they look forward to the Thursday release. And if if we started getting lax about that, we would lose people and disappoint them. The one thing we're always reminding ourselves and each other about is that it's not about us. It's about what we deliver to who's listening. And if we don't honor our promise, that's who we've let down. And like I say, it's the same with blogging. I said I used to do it every day and it was weak sauce, but now I do it Tuesdays and Fridays. And even if nobody's ever going to read it, just for my own satisfaction, I said I was going to do it. I'm freaking doing it. And the election week was the tough one, because we wanted to wait until the election results were in. So we did everything really late. It was a tight turnaround to get it up Thursday morning. But, I have a fabulous editor in Ms. Davis, and she got that done. It's consistency. And, no or low expectations. You have to do it for the love of it. I believe we have the best time. It's forced visiting for us too, because sometimes we go, sometime when we're not catching up with each other, whatever. And our friendship is even stronger because of it, because we spend so much more time noodling and discussing things.
Tell me about the concept of guests, because a lot of people do a podcast and, guests, and I'm sure you get a million emails a day asking for people to be guests on your show, yet it may not necessarily be a show about guests.
We decided early on that it wasn't going to be a show about guests, that we were going to have a conversation. And, I don't even really know why, except that it keeps it consistent. A few people have asked us, are you ever going to have guests? And we just say we're not going to. It's just not that kind of thing. We want to keep it to 30 minutes. That's the max. You get in, hopefully have a laugh, maybe hear about something you didn't hear elsewhere, and get on with your life. It's just the way we decided to do it. It's funny because there was a time maybe, I don't know, 12 or so episodes in when we were kind of waffling a little bit. And then we decided, no, we're just going to keep it that way. And so when we go on vacation, or, I was in Italy last year for 3 weeks, we did best ofs. And, we just want to make sure that there's something up there every week.
What if the prime minister calls, or what if the PMO calls and says the prime minister's available? Would you like him as a guest?
I don't know what I'd do about that. No, I don't think we'd do it.
Cool.
We might put a drop in.
Yeah, I might suggest that, because that's what's happening now. I think politicians are beginning to discover that there's authenticity and opportunity inside these podcasts for longer form conversations that people are willing to listen to, that they're not going to be able to get if they turn on CBC or CTV, because everything's a soundbite, often poisonous, as you've pointed out on your blog.
I think it would be a good story to say that we turned down the prime minister. We'd have a really good discussion about that. That's how we turned it around. Yeah.
When it comes to politics, you're vocal enough about it. You've got a great blog on it, and now that the results are in, do you have your seatbelt fastened for the next 4 years, or do you look at it as more anxiety? How do you look at what's coming?
No, we got through it. I mean, it's not our country for one thing, but we got through it before. I know things are different now, but my take on it is, let me try that again. My take on it is that everybody justified it last time and said it was a mistake because this happened and that happened. And now they've shown us that's what they want. It's a democracy. You either have to accept it or not. And I equate it to the old radio rating system that everybody hated, because you'd send somebody a toonie and expect them to fill out a diary. They throw it to their kid because it's too much work. But it was the system we had, so we had to accept it. And this is how it works. So do I think they made the right decision? Not in my opinion, but it's not my country and not my vote. So we'll just see what happens. And I've really pulled back from getting too immersed in news because I can't do a damn thing about it.
Understood. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned earlier on, you've mentioned things like fear or anxiety, or maybe there's fear of failure in there, like some of the things that kind of were drivers early in your career. And now the news is really designed to stoke all that in everybody. And if you're not reacting to it, they'll find a way to gaslight you into it.
Yeah.
So how do you control the news? How do you control what you ingest and not ingest in this day and age?
I get a few newsletters in the morning, carefully chosen, and look through them. I can click if I want to read more. I get news alerts from a couple of places, so I know if somebody's been bombed or somebody famous is ill or something. So I kind of keep up in that way. I mean, I still am a news junkie, but I don't live and breathe it. And I actively look for ways to just not pay attention for hours at a time. I find I'm happier that way. I sort of subscribe to the Stoicism philosophy. If I can't do something about it, I'm not going to spend my time thinking about it. That doesn't mean burying your head in the sand. It just means taking it easier on yourself in whatever way that manifests. And that's one way for me. Just, I'm not going to get wound up about it. No more. Yeah.
What is Peter Canada?
What's that? Peter Canada. Oh, Peter Canada. So, Marianne Iveson, amazing talent in voice and radio and everything. And Rachel Gilbert, another one, ex-radio, and now, podcaster, everything. We formed this little group to sort of, we kind of consider ourselves a company almost. We cheer each other on. We give each other advice. If somebody's not sure about what to bid on something or whatever, we're there for each other. We were all at Vion North for the last time together. We get together for lunch. So one day, Rachel got a really great big voice job for Petro Canada. And every time she wrote Petro in the chat, autocorrect changed it to Peter. So she kept saying, "Oh, I have a session for Peter Canada. I have a Peter Canada, Peter Canada." So I think it was Marianne who said, "That's what we should call ourselves. We're the Peters." So now it's, we'll write, okay, what is Peter Rachel still at that thing today or whatever? And so we call ourselves the Peters, and our partners are honorary Peters. Um, anyway, that's just where it came from. It's silly. It makes us laugh.
And it's really important too, because, when you're working in the creative space and voiceover, you've got people to lean on, to talk to. I have a podcast producers group. It's Podcast Super Friends. We put out a podcast every once in a while, but I got my voiceover people too. And Marianne's one of them.
Yep.
And yeah, there's a few of them out there you can call and ask questions and lean on.
Yes.
So yeah, talk about that just because a lot of people are going to wander, especially radio people. They're let go from their jobs, and now what? So talk a little bit about that fellowship that needs to happen, even if it's just online.
You can do more than you think you can. If I had a nickel for every time I thought or heard somebody say, "But this is all I know how to do," I don't believe it. I believe that there's something inside you, whether it's I want to make beaded jewelry, or I want to fix motorcycles, or I want to grow plants. I don't know what it is, but I think that, you need other people to remind you how great you are. It doesn't feel good to be kicked out of a club, even if it's a club you don't want to be in anymore, or even if it's a club isn't good for you, or a club that this is going to happen anyway. Had I stayed at CJBK, I would have lost my job eventually, right? I think you need that trusted person who's going to have your back. There's so much competition, sort of on a lower level, that people don't talk about. If Marianne and Rachel and I, for example, have all been up for the same job. And one time we were up for a significant job, and Marianne got it. And I didn't have a shred of envy. I am freaking happy for her, because I know the work she puts into everything. I know how much, talent she has, and how all those things. It's not about one-upping somebody else. And I think that you start to feel less than when you've been fired, and you're not. You're a number on a spreadsheet that got whited out. That's all it is. And I think people can pivot a lot more easily than they believe. I'm not afraid of failure. I've done it spectacularly a few times, and that's a beautiful quality to acquire if you just don't care about that. I mean, don't get me wrong. I want to be liked and I want to succeed, but that's the time to try something new and to talk to your pals and your friends and find out what that thing might be from the outside looking in. Sometimes they have a better idea than you do.
I think the first place you start is writing. And I know everyone is more than their resume, just like what you said.
Absolutely.
So communication specialist as it is, you can write, you certainly know how to do social media, you know how to do promo, but all that involves writing.
Yes.
So learn to write well.
Absolutely. And the only way, for me anyway, was to practice. I wrote my first book in 2004, I want to say. And going through the editing process, I thought I wouldn't live through it. It was all red marks and deletions, and it would just look like, an abstract painting every page. But if once I could remove myself from it and look at it from the outside looking in, it was such a learning experience. And putting yourself in some of those places where you're not going to be the smartest guy in the room is good for you. It's really good for you.
Do you have 5 books?
Yeah, 5 or 6. I co-wrote one, so 5.5.
So I sometimes go around and say, okay, well, that's a podcast. We can make that a podcast. And sometimes I look at a podcast and I say, oh, that can be a book. Now, it doesn't, not necessarily when it comes to podcasts, but when do you see something and say, okay, that can be a book?
Well, it depends. So I wrote one about dealing with the media that some PR courses were using and still do. And that grew out of a blog post that tons of people responded to and had stuff to add to. And it just seemed like there was more of a need for it at the time. The naked truth is about the summer I spent working at a nudist camp. How many people did that? And how many people have written about it? Not that many. And people ask me about it all the time. If I sort of half mention it, they always want to know more. So I told the whole story. I guess it's just, I don't know. I wrote one about when I nearly died from sepsis because I didn't think there was enough information out there. Again, they're not bestsellers. They're not. You're not going to see me on the New York Times list. If I had to live off them, well, I'd be in big trouble. But that's not the point. The point was the doing of it, the writing of it, the getting to a point where I was satisfied with it. And it's neat to hear from people that say they enjoyed it. So that's cool.
Yeah. Somebody mentioned to me the other day, and they're in that sort of voiceover support circle. They didn't mention it to me directly, but it was something they said on another podcast about how blessed we are to be living this creative life.
It's absolutely true. And there's no limit to it. You can try what you want. I bought a Cricut machine and I'm making things with it. I'm having fun with that. I mean, I painted, I sold a few paintings and then I stopped. I just try things. It's just really neat to see that you might be capable of something that you didn't know. And I'll tell you, my first few paintings were horrific. Like they look like a drunk monkey was maybe given a paintbrush and told to go wild, and not a talented one. So it's not always immediately apparent, but it's fun to try.
Lisa, you have been more than generous with your time today, and also with your voice, because you're probably going to need that voice for a podcast or voiceover work later today. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been really fun talking to you. And I mean, you're a guy I've known has been around for quite a while and never got a chance to talk to before. So nice to know you're a human being.
The Sound Off Podcast is written and hosted by Matt Kundle. Produced by Evan Serminski. Edited by Chloe Emo Lane. Social media by Aiden Glassy. Another great creation from the Sound Off Media Company. There's always more at soundoffpodcast.com.